out-of-control wildfires now the norm as global warming continues to pose a threat.
Well, some politicians in Germany say the extreme weather is the result of global warming, and they're calling for work on climate protection measures to be accelerated.
The floods in Germany aren't the only extreme weather event we've seen this summer. There was the dramatic heat wave in Canada and the western United States last month, and Russia, Mexico and New Zealand have all been experiencing unusually high temperatures. Now, the climate science is very clear on this. It has been predicting, not just for years, but for decades, that if we continue to pump huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we will experience increasingly high temperatures. And because warm air holds more moisture, that means heavier rainfall too.
Climate change is defined as significant and long-lasting changes in the Earth's climate and weather patterns. And nowadays, the term is used almost synonymously with global warming, which isn't too surprising, as they tend to go hand in hand with one another. Climate change, of course, affects many other aspects of the Earth's natural systems as well, and while some are more well-known than others, they are all equally significant. Now, you would think that by the 21st century, people would be able to agree on something as large-scale and significant as climate change. And perhaps, contrary to popular belief, most people do. But that doesn't mean everyone agrees 100% on everything about climate change. Today, there are still some that argue, not against the notion that climate change exists, this has pretty much been accepted by all scientists, but rather as to what the cause and effect of these changes are, how it will affect our future, and more importantly, what we should be doing about it right now. After all, the Earth runs its own carbon cycle, and it has done so since, well, forever. Are we humans really to blame for climate change? How significant is our impact really? And have we already gone too far, or is there still a silver lining? In this video, we want to discuss what climate change is, what brings it about, what the effects of climate change are, and what we should be doing about it. Sit back, relax, and keep an open mind, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get into it. Climate change affects several natural processes on Earth. As we have stated before, temperatures across the globe are already changing. In addition, storms, droughts, extreme weather conditions, ocean levels and acidity, as well as glacial melting, are all affected either directly or indirectly, most of which will probably have far-reaching effects for many decades to come, if not centuries. We have all seen it. We have all been painted a picture of the challenges we are to face due to increased and intensified weather storms like cyclones or hurricanes, and floods due to unprecedented rainfall. And the opposite in some areas where the climate is hot and dry and ripe for raging wildfires. Another common topic is the rising sea levels, which could see many coastal areas and low-lying areas go underwater, the effects of which are almost impossible to fully comprehend. And it is almost strange to think that at the center of all this are only two elements, namely oxygen and carbon, both of which are utterly essential to life on Earth, each in their own way. Yet, when combined in the form of CO2, it has the potential to throw the delicate processes of life and nature as a whole out of balance. This is where the problem lies, and although it is necessary, the consequences of having too much CO2 in our atmosphere could be dire. But is this really our final, unavoidable destination? A world underwater, yet ablaze where it is not? Or might it be that this is only one of several possible outcomes? Might it be that there is still hope, and much more of it, than some would like to admit. But before we answer that question, let's take a step back and first understand why carbon is such an important element and how Earth's carbon cycle works. It may be a strange concept to grasp, but all the carbon currently on Earth is the same amount of carbon that there has ever been and most likely ever will be. The carbon on Earth simply changes form as it moves through various processes. You see, carbon is the basis of all life on Earth, hence the term carbon-based life forms. Carbon forms the backbone of macromolecules that include the likes of proteins and nucleic acid, basically meaning the stuff that we are made of. Thus, even we humans, when we are formed and then again cremated or buried where we decompose, we are simply another mode of transport for carbon moving from one form to another. There are of course many such processes in Earth's carbon cycle as a whole. Our atmosphere contains carbon atoms in the form of CO2. Through plants and humans, nature reuses carbon as it travels from the atmosphere into organisms, then from the organisms back to the atmosphere. This process repeats again and again and is never ending. Most carbon is stored in rocks and sediments, while the rest is found in the oceans, atmosphere, and living organisms. These are the various reservoirs which hold carbon. Plants and other living organisms also produce carbon simply by living and dying. Sometimes dead organisms turn into fossil fuels, and these in turn are combusted, producing CO2, and so the carbon is reintroduced into the atmosphere. So the cycle continues again and again. While most of this is normal and not necessarily a problem, there comes a point beyond which the amounts of the various types of molecules in the atmosphere can be problematic. It is the composition of our atmosphere that is crucial to how the climate on Earth operates. You have probably heard the term greenhouse gases, and these are the gases that play the biggest role in how heat from the Sun and Earth are reflected, absorbed, and emitted. And it is no surprise that highest on the list of concerns is carbon dioxide, hence why the carbon cycle and its stability are essential to understanding climate change. There are of course other factors that play a role here, like methane and water vapor, but for the sake of this video, we will focus on carbon as this is the factor most within our control. From the Sun, solar radiation travels through space and reaches the Earth's atmosphere. Now some of it is immediately reflected back into space. The rest of the Sun's energy is absorbed by the land and the oceans, heating the Earth. This heat radiates from the Earth back towards space. Now some of this heat is trapped by greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and this is a good thing, as this is what keeps the Earth warm enough to sustain life. Thus, greenhouse gases are necessary. However, human activities such as burning fossil fuels, agriculture, and land clearing are increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, thus creating an imbalance in the delicate system. This increased amount of greenhouse gases is trapping extra heat, and this is causing the Earth's temperature to rise, which of course has several other knock-on effects. Now, why is it that there is some controversy around this topic of climate change? We don't claim to know the answer to this, but there are some interesting points to, at the very least, just be aware of. First of all, when it comes to climate change, it can be incredibly difficult to separate science from politics. It is no secret that there is much to gain or lose, going either way, when discussions around fossil fuel companies, green technology companies, and the like come up. This has created doubt in some as to whether the information being shared is reliable, or whether it has been influenced by hidden agendas. Secondly, another valid point against the prediction that we are heading for a catastrophe is that all models predicting factors like rise in Earth's temperature and sea levels have errors and make use of some assumptions. No model is absolutely perfect. Sometimes this is not an issue, as the error is generally very small compared to the measurement or prediction. The issue with climate change is that once you start looking very far ahead and you go further outward with the projection, which is somewhat unreliable to begin with, the errors accumulate. The result is that at some point, the errors become so large that some argue too much of the reliability of the projection is lost to base any important decisions on. The last interesting argument against global warming relates to the financial implications in those areas that would be affected by rising sea levels. The question has been posed that if we were to assume that the sea levels will indeed rise as predicted, submerging enormous parts of countries all over the world, why on earth would the financial powers invest in these areas? How is it possible, for example, to still get a 30-40 year mortgage in these areas that will be completely submerged before the loan has even been repaid? The monetary value of what stands to be lost if the sea levels do rise as predicted is enormous, yet not a single financial prospectus has alluded to rising sea levels being a risk. Now again, we are in no position to say whether there is truth in this or not, but it is interesting food for thought, and it should provide for some good conversation at your next get-together. You're welcome. Right, now let's get into why you are actually here. What does the data actually show? The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released its latest report early in August this year, and it's about 4,000 pages long. Let's just take a look at the fundamentals from this report. Basically, it has been reinforced that the human factor in climate change is virtually without question, and the effects are not good. But this isn't anything new really. The key point the report makes is that they can say this with much more confidence than before. The report has again said that if we do not act appropriately, we are heading for very difficult times in the near future. And most concerning to some is that the report also states that we have reached a point where some damage is now unavoidable. Meaning that even if we reduce all emissions right now to nothing, there are still some lasting effects that will come to fruition in the next couple of decades. The report has stated that the Earth's surface temperature is just over 1 degree Celsius higher than the period of 1850 to 1900, which is used as a benchmark as it is the first period deemed sufficiently globally complete for the sake of evaluation. Now, 1 degree doesn't sound like much, but remember, the climate is a sensitive system, and small changes could have very disrupting consequences. Now, we should mention that an observation of rising surface temperatures on its own is not anything to be concerned about really, especially as the Earth experiences natural temperature fluctuations all the time. Have a look at the Earth's temperatures going back hundreds of thousands of years. Now, looking at this, you probably have a couple of questions. 1. What causes these natural temperature cycles? And 2. Why then is the current rise in temperature anything to be concerned about? Let's address the first question. These cycles are known as Milankovitch cycles, and they have to do with the way in which the Earth moves through space as it orbits the Sun. There's a bit of an exaggeration in these clips, just to make the point obvious. The combined effect of these cycles is a periodic rise and fall in Earth's temperature. Now, there is of course more than one mechanism at work here, but again, let's look at the critical CO2 process specifically. A key concept here is that water is capable of holding more CO2 when it is cold than when it is hot. This means that as the Earth naturally heats up due to the Milankovitch cycle, the seas are unable to hold onto the CO2 it contained during the cold period, and so it releases it back into the atmosphere. This means more greenhouse gases in the air, meaning heat is more readily trapped and heats the Earth even more, and so on. This enables these rapid increases in temperature. Now, of course, this doesn't continue indefinitely, and the Earth eventually reaches its turning point and the process reverses, as is clear on the graphs. And what is important to note is how closely the CO2 levels track these cycles in temperature. And this is pretty much the whole crux of the matter. You see, for many, many years, going back hundreds of thousands of years, the pattern has been consistent. And if you want a single picture that explains the whole cause for concern around climate change and global warming, then there is none other as clear as this. It is this break in the pattern, This increase in CO2 brought about by human activities that, if we consider how temperature and CO2 levels have been related in the past, indicate that we are most probably heading for some unprecedented temperatures, along with all that it affects. We leave it to you to draw your own conclusions as to just what the effects over the next few decades or even centuries will be. We simply don't know for a fact how severe the changes will be, but changes there will be. With all this being said, we would like to pose a question. Can anyone truly believe that solving this problem is uncomplicated? Is it really realistic to stop everything involving fossil fuels? How many industries, lives, and livelihoods would be affected? What role does green technology play, and can we overcome the challenges of storing the energy from green power sources effectively? We have to accept that climate change can only be addressed over time, gradually, sensibly. It is a very complex issue, and it will take a collective effort, which hopefully obtains global support sooner rather than later. Before we end this video, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to leave you with something positive though. Although the outlook may seem bad, remember that humanity is incredibly powerful when we choose to be. Remember that we have faced serious challenges in the past and overcome them. We have made such incredible strides to come to where we are today. We agree that there is cause for concern, and we agree that action is necessary on a global scale. But what we don't advocate is fear-mongering, panic, and rash decision-making. For acting without clear and level-headed thought may bring about even worse challenges. If there is one thing to take away from this video, it should be that there is always reason to be positive. Through clear objectives, dedication, and the pure brilliance that lies within us, we are convinced that climate change and global warming is merely a eureka away from becoming another challenge that humanity has successfully overcome through working together and technological advancement. Until next time, cheers.